Is this thing on? Hello, everyone. My name is Lewis Harris, and thank you for joining us here at Record in Progress. I created this podcast as a reaction to my flabbergasted surprise of the 2024 election results. And I believed that I didn't do enough in the election to have it go the way I wanted it to go. And so I created Record in Progress as a means of really bringing different perspectives, stories, and narratives together to create understanding and a pathway towards a unified society for all of us. And so I am privileged to have my next guest who is a friend in the community, somebody who I absolutely respect and is a bit of a political strategist in his own right. If you could introduce yourself.
Sure. This is John. I am a former resident of the great state of Washington. I have lived in North Carolina with my wife and two kids for the past 2 years, 2.5 years. As Lewis said, I was a political consultant and I consider it my nighttime job. My daytime job was contract management, but I did political consulting and campaign work for multiple candidates in Washington while I was there. And then since having moved to North Carolina, I am a vice chair in the Moore County Democratic Party. Moore County is the county where I currently live, as well as getting involved in different political committees, as well as engaged in some social equality items, such as our local LGBTQ outreach and support group, Sandhills Pride, and really just trying to do well in the county that we call home now.
How do you identify yourself, John?
I identify as a straight black male.
And full disclosure, like the reason I ask some of the questions about your credentials that you sell yourself on job applications is to give the audience something to connect with, to understand better who the guest is on online here. And so that's why I asked that. And thank you. There's no expectations on what that answer should be. Thank you for the answer. The next question I have is, what is a credential that you use most often to sell yourself on job applications?
Job applications, generally my personal life. And the reason I say that, specifically what I do in politics and what I do for outreach, is that if the company that I'm applying for or trying to work with doesn't accept that part of me, then that's a job that I don't want to do. And so, right off the bat, I tell them, by the way, I'm involved in democratic politics where I live, or I'm involved in campaigns here, or I'm involved in volunteer work with Sandhills Pride. So they already know what they're getting, and that way we can just skip on along past, well, does that fit in with the company motto, or does that fit in with the company culture? I've been privileged enough to work for folks when I worked in Washington, working with the government, specifically Snohomish County, and then here in North Carolina, where I've been in the private sector and in the public sector with governments. That has never been an issue. And generally, that's because where I work is generally located in the bluer counties of North Carolina.
Excellent. You let them know who you are up front so there can be an alignment of your employment and their culture, which I think is a great example to follow. I tend to follow the same example when it comes to relationships. The point is to get all of the stuff that might ruffle the feathers of that other person or that company out up front so that you can enter into that relationship as your total self and not expect to not be yourself.
I'm not trying to cause blowback 2 years down the line.
Right.
Midterms are coming up in 2 years, and I'll be working, working the lines and working with candidates, and they're just like, "Well, I didn't know you're part of that." No, no, no. We got into this when you hired me.
Right.
This is what I'm going to be doing. So that's the way I do it. But also, as I said, it hasn't been an issue where I've gone, because generally I'm not necessarily of like-minded folks, but people who understand that you have a professional life, but also that you do have a personal life that can be involved in politics as long as it's not affecting your day job.
That's right. Excellent. So the first question in our line of questioning here
Fire
is,
away.
how did you vote in the 2024 presidential election?
Soberly. I voted for Kamala Harris for president. I'm here in North Carolina, so I voted for Josh Stein for governor because I really didn't think that a black Nazi was going to be very efficient for the state of North Carolina, or healthy or wise. And then I worked on as a vice chair for the Moore County Democratic Party, worked to help elect other folks. So I was working with a lot of folks who were on the school board, and we were able to turn 3 of the 4 elections that we were working on towards folks that we were working for, as well as getting the vote out for people down ballot as well. So our lieutenant governor will now be a Democrat. A superintendent for public instruction person will now be a Democrat after a few years of a Republican. Our attorney general will soon be Jeff Jackson, who was formerly in Congress and his seat had been axed due to gerrymandering, and so he will now be serving as our attorney general.
Wow. So you put in the work.
Yeah, I work.
Very excellent, which I'm again really grateful for you being willing to be on the podcast, because perspective, like so many others, is one that only, a privileged few get to interact with and understand. And so I'm just gracious for you being willing to come on and share your perspectives with our listeners and just have the conversation with me. So thank you.
Of course.
So the next question I have for you, John, is what are 3 feelings you have about the results of the 2024 presidential election?
Mm-hmm. Feelings.
Yeah.
So I've been told that I don't do feelings well, but I do have elongated thoughts on what occurred. The first is me not shocked. And what I mean by that is I have been Black and male in this country a lot longer than I've been a liberal Democrat. And so, color me not shocked that the country still isn't quite ready for either a woman or another person of color to be president. And I do have my own thoughts on that and where that comes from as well. But if I'm being perfectly honest about the election, why it didn't shock me was the messaging that I think that we tried to put out there, and not necessarily like from on high down, but like just us on a subatomic grassroots level of actually getting out to our neighbors and explaining why we're voting the way that we're voting. I think that has been lost, and that is due to a lot of siloing we have self-engaged in, as well as the other side, the right has also self-engaged in. And so we just did not break down enough barriers to get the message across. And where that seems to have taken a direct hit, I've been focusing specifically on North Carolina, but there are counties all across North Carolina where Donald Trump didn't gain any votes. Like, he pretty much got the same amount of votes that he had 4 years ago in 2020 during the middle of a mass pandemic. What occurred was there was a drop off in votes that had been for Biden that didn't go to Kamala Harris. And my goal for the next couple of years is to what I call embracing what they call the wilderness. When a political party goes out of power, as the Democrats are about, they've lost the Senate and they've lost the presidency. And so for the first time in 8 years, they'll be out of all 3 major, the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They won't have control of. And they call that being out in the wilderness. And they would call that because you're out in the cold, you've been cast aside. And a lot of people find that what we did in 2016 was we used that time to mobilize, to engage in every single idiotic thing that the Trump administration decided to stick its hands into and try to screw around with. And we didn't take a lot of that time to do self-reflection on what we were missing, where we're missing folks who would normally vote for us but just didn't. Not necessarily those who flipped their votes or decided they were a Democrat in 2008 and decided in 2016 that they would vote for Trump. I meant the people that just gave up on the system altogether. We need to spend this time engaging in the fights that we need to ensure that we have orderly succession and that the country doesn't fall apart. But we really do need to hone in on where are we in this country that we keep entering into the wilderness and not having a reason to come back out of it with a message and a plan. And that starts with going to those counties where you saw a mass drop off and engaging with those folks on a grassroots level, not a consultant level out of DC, not a politician level at a Democratic Party that runs a state. I mean, actually going into Anson County, where Joe Biden won it by 0.5% and then Kamala Harris just lost it by 1.5%. I want to know where that 1.5% went and how we can get them back. And that's what we need to be doing on a mass level. So that's why I was not surprised. I just saw the work that needs to be engaged in it. And so hence my third point to answer your question in full, which is we got to do the work and get involved to not waste this opportunity, consider this crisis an opportunity and not the end of the world, and get to work.
Yep, crisis. But, thank you for laying out the real strategy that Democrats need to do immediately, right?
Correct.
It's interesting, though, your insight on where the Democratic Party went wrong in really the ramping up of the presidential election cycle here in 2024. I
Mm-hmm.
remember because I'm part of those text chains and email lists and whatnot, there was an early survey that really asked about what the issues were. But I'm interested in your perspective on this because this happens all the time. The early polling, what are the issues, trying to inform the candidate what to run on essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the after you answer those questions, you are asked to donate, right? And so to me, when I go through that exercise, I'm like, oh, you just really did a good job of masking the fact that you want to raise money, which I'm happy to give, and I gave, throughout the election cycle. But given the results of the election, like either that survey didn't go to all the people it needed to go to, or they just didn't listen to the results, right?
So a couple of things. If we're gonna lay anything out, it needs to be that deep down, as much as I love me some Joe Biden, the plan needed to be that Joe Biden was going to hand off power at the end of his first term and give about a year and a half's worth to actually run a full campaign. What Kamala Harris did in 107 days was astronomically brilliant.
Yeah.
But it obviously was not enough because there was not enough time she camped out in the 7 battle states that they call. She camped out in all of them, talked to them, and that was to the detriment of a lot of places. If you notice where there's fall off in the elections, it's in blue states where folks knew that their vote wasn't going to count. Like in California, they're still counting votes, but there will be a drop off in the amount of folks that voted for the Democratic ticket in California. And that's because she didn't have the time to be spending in California as much as she was in trying to win the 7 states that count as our battleground states that a person has to win in order to win the election. She was fighting a battle, electoral colleges, and not a campaign. And that is not a way to run a campaign. And the only way that you can fully run a campaign is if you have 9 months to do it. I personally am of the mindset of the way that the Europeans do it. I think that they find us crazy that we have a 2 years long campaign. It's about money, let's be honest about it. But the fact that she didn't have that runway cost her because she wasn't able to have the full 50-state strategy that you need to then run a campaign. What do I mean by a 50-state strategy? It started up by Howard Dean, who was the former DNC chair, and was run to perfection by Obama in 2008. And that is, I am in every damn state talking to whomever will put a microphone in front of me. And you need time and money to do that. And there wasn't enough of either in 107 days to do that. So she camped out in the battleground states, which is a smart play if you only have a short amount of time to do what you need to do. The detriment is, of course, there are people in other states that aren't seeing you, and also being able to spread your voice a little bit. And if you don't get the messaging right, then you blow it. And that's what occurred because she didn't win any of the battleground states. That was 90 days that she spent running around 7 states and did not win any of them. That tells me that the strategy was off, the messaging was off, and we have to then recalculate what that needs to be, and then have a longer time and a longer schedule to actually go about figuring out what it is that we need to be telling folks and how we can reach them.
Right. So, and I want to just touch on a point that you understand because of the work that you do, especially around the inclusion and diversity work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Sister had 107 days to run a nationwide political campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's been listening to Black women or underprivileged folks, less historically underrepresented folks, knows that a lot of times folks in those communities feel like they have to work harder, right?
Yes.
So you're right. She did something brilliant because, and maybe this is just my naive rose-colored glasses self, but the message of light and hope and joy, like those are things that I thought really connected with people. They connected with me because I just believe that those are essential elements to a good life and what I believe this country promises us. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, justice, and freedom for all, those should enable you to find hope and peace and love and joy and all that. It's this the system just kind of doing the way the system has always done, and we're naive to the fact that we've actually changed something over the last 10 to 15 years.
Is it a system? Yes. To shorthand, yes,
Okay.
there is a systemic issue. I think you were trying to quote Scandal. If I can, you got to work twice as hard to get half as much from these folks. Every Black woman, every Black man. Whenever we heard Olivia Pope's dad say that, every Black person watching that show, and yep, that is the key, is that you have to do everything twice as hard, and you'll probably only receive half the credit. We're in a position right now where, yes, the system, it was a systemic issue, partially by not having the runway that was necessary. But if you're asking me, if she even had that runway, if she had 10 months to run, would we
Mm,
still be fighting the same issues? You bet your ass that we would, because there is an issue with regards to strong women taking the reins of anything in this country. There are deeper issues with regards to Black folks taking reins of anything in this country. And if we're going to combine the two, and
right.
a person of color who is a woman taking the reins of anything, we're going to have issues that we also need to outlay. Again, that couldn't be alleviated in 107 days. If we're going to have this full-fledged moment in America where the next time that we put someone up who is either a woman or a person of color or
Mm,
both, we need to have the runway in order to deep dive into these issues that we still keep coming up against, and these borders and walls that we still keep having to knock down or reiterate how someone is to succeed in this country, reaching the highest office, given that they are Black or they are Hispanic or they are a woman or they are Native American. And that is a systemic issue that dovetails into the messaging issue that we're currently having when it comes to what was it that didn't sell with the Democrats. There is a way to talk about identity politics, and I hate using that term, but it's the easiest one that we got right now. There is a way to talk about that while also ingratiating that into how economic outputs can be greater if you follow a certain subset. What do I mean by that? Affirmative action obviously benefited African Americans with access to places of employment and places of higher education for generations. The individuals who also benefited the most, besides African Americans in this country, were white women,
okay.
because they also had the opportunity to then go through those doors that had been opened, as well as more of them entering into that
Right.
job market or into that university. If you can make that correlation that helping the disadvantaged also helps those who may consider themselves disadvantaged but are not privileged, but also did have access at the beginning, you can actually start to have those conversations that benefit everybody involved. I feel the same way about when we talk about things like marijuana legalization. And we always bring it back to that the Black community would benefit from this, whereas all populations would benefit from the legalization of marijuana. And how we actually need to discuss it is not just the benefits that the Black community would have with higher rates of incarceration for doing the same crime that individuals who are white, as well as the economic benefits of the legalization of marijuana as well. It helps individual if it's legalized and it no longer shows up on your record. If your record has been expunged, then it prevents you from being discriminated against in housing, prevents you from being discriminated against if you're looking for a job. It prevents you from having CPS or adult protective services, child protective services, or DFS entering your home and engaging in another aspect of your life because of marijuana. Where is the highest concentration of African Americans in this country? The South. Where are the laws of marijuana not changed since they became on the books? The South. There is a reason for that. And you need to begin to explain the economic impacts of that, as well as explaining how it can assist with the drug issues that we're having with fentanyl and heroin and other opioids as well, how you can tax it and then utilize those funds to engage in drug rehab and drug diversion therapies. There are ways that we can discuss it, but you have to change the way that you're actually integrating it into the system.
Right. And some of that change, the term that I've learned is called the Overton window. Is that an appropriate?
Oh, we're way past that, buddy.
Okay, okay. But and while you were talking, I just looked because I actually hadn't heard that before, that affirmative action helped white women, and it looked like the University of Texas research came out of there several years back that indicated white women may have disproportionately benefited from the change, subsequent changes to the initial affirmative action kind of legislation. And so that was interesting. Thank you for educating me on that because I actually didn't know that. So the next question I have for you is, what do you fear most about the next Trump presidency?
Fear the most? That's a loaded question. I mean, there's plenty to fear, but I mean, is he competent enough to get it involved? I feel that there's been an erosion. I don't know if it's necessarily a fear, as in this is what I'm guessing has occurred, and so it's what we need to be on the lookout for the most, is that he's invited people to capitulate before they've even given up a fight.
Right.
And what I mean by that is his last three picks to the departments, Gates to run the Justice Department, and Gabbard to be Director of National Intelligence, and
Right.
the Fox News guy is going to run the defense and whatnot. And apparently, everyone has a history of either sexual assault or treason or something or other that would, they would fail a general background test done by the FBI. So he's not even engaging the FBI in doing these background checks.
Right.
Is there an automatic capitulation for the Republicans who will now be in power and thus have the ability to confirm these people when they come before the Senate? Do they have the stomach to actually get in a fight? I don't think they do. I think that they'll roll over and they'll say, well, we're in power and he got in power by doing what he's doing. So who the hell am I to come along and try to fight that? And if that's what we're working with, then you know what the scales are. The job is then the second question is, do you have the stomach for it? Do you have the time and the energy to fight it? Part of what I've been saying about being in the wilderness is that, yes, there is somewhat of a time frame that you can engage in those items, but you're still working on your own self. The Democrats have a lot of work to do on themselves, right? And you can't be both savior and survivor. I can't save the Republic if I'm trying to survive the Republic. And so that is what my concern is the most.
That's great. So, in essence, the unabated allowance of Trump's policies, and really all of those policies.
Is there going to be fight left? Will the Republic stand in 4 years? Yes. Will it be a shell of itself? Well, I guess we're going to have to see.
We'll have to see. Okay, so on the other side of that coin, what do you hope most about the next Trump presidency?
That Well, one, that it doesn't hurt. I often tell this, and it's going to make me sound like a sadist, but pain is the greatest motivator. It's the greatest educator.
But
I had told that when Trump first got into office back in 2016. I used to tell that to my Democratic friends, my liberal friends, of just like, pain. This should educate you as to what it is that went wrong and how we can fix it. Well, we got a lot of fight out of it, but we didn't obviously fix the underlying issues, hence why 8 years later we're back in the same position. We didn't
right.
resolve what it is that we were looking for. My hope is that we take this angst and anger and pain and utilize it towards figuring out what our issues were, given what I've laid out already, other items that I'm sure I've been blind to as in my position and where I sit and where I live, and then that it allows you to then put in the work that you need to. Before you hit record, we have been talking about what's been going on in North Carolina. I am of the mindset that there are reasonable people in and around this country that just haven't been tapped to. And I know that that's true because, as 50-50 as the state of North Carolina is, enough people had the mindset that maybe a black Nazi would not be a good choice for our governor.
Mm,
And the only way that Josh Stein could win the governorship in North Carolina was enough people on the other side of the aisle saw that too and came to a clearer mindset of, who do I want running my state. The state still voted for Donald Trump, so obviously there were a lot of people who split ticket. There were a lot of people who just didn't vote for Mark Robinson at all. They voted for Trump and then they just kind of stopped at their ballot, which I think also tanked a lot of the down ballot folks as well, which goes to show you candidate quality, always the best. I'm going to plug that till the day I die and get people that are actually smart and intuitive. But
please.
I think that if you're asking me what I'm hopeful for, is that people aren't out of reach. That as divided as we are, that you can still find something common. If I'm going to try to hope for anything, it's going to be that.
That's great.